Hi, folks. Welcome to this week's episode of Voices of Resilience. My name is Erik Muckey. I am the Executive Director and CEO of Lost&Found, a Sioux Falls, South Dakota-based 501c3 nonprofit that facilitates comprehensive suicide prevention programs targeting young adults 15 to 34 in the United States. And this is our weekly live cast where we talk about the ways in which we find resilience for ourselves, provide resilience to others, and share resilience in our community. Really happy to have you here this week. We have a really fantastic guest to reschedule. We're happy to finally be able to get back together with Dr. Ashley Lang and talk a little bit about how resilience can be found through self-awareness. And this month, as you kind of gathered from the month of March, we spend a lot of time talking about wellness in March. What we're getting into in the month of April is really getting an understanding and clear perception of counseling center resources, and also sort of the ways in which we find resilience for ourselves and go through that process of discovering the help that we need and finding the resources that help us become more resilient. So today we'll really focus a little bit on sort of that self-awareness component, sort of how to know yourself well enough to know when you're doing well and also when you're not, and be able to navigate sort of the processes and resources that you need in your community to be successful. So along the way today, we'll talk a little bit about sort of that process through sort of finding the help that you need. But as we always do each week, I want to get started and first thank the folks who make this possible every week. Our friends from the A-Strip Family Foundation in Rochester, Minnesota, and American Bank and Trust here in Sioux Falls. The A-Strip Family Foundation encourage you to learn more about their work. It's a family foundation based in Rochester, as I mentioned, that is built on the values of family, faith, and healthcare. And they've been a longtime supporter of Lost&Found and the programs that we deliver on South Dakota and Minnesota college campuses. If you want to learn more about them, go to the astripfamilyfoundation.org to learn more. And our other sponsor, another longtime supporter of Lost&Found and a partner here in South Dakota. We're really proud to partner and have sponsorship from American Bank and Trust, home base in Huron, South Dakota, with offices here in Sioux Falls. Learn more about American Bank and Trust by going to abt.bank. As always, we're really appreciative of their sponsorship and the chance to share our message at the bank and be a partner with them in this work in South Dakota and Minnesota. So we're back again this week, and I really am thankful for the guests that we have joining us here today. So Dr. Ashley Lang coming to us here. Ashley has more than 15 years of experience in higher education. So kind of the fitting message here for us. We're a mostly higher education focused organization, and we're happy to have somebody else from that space. But Ashley has more than 15 years of experience, not just in higher education, but also in leadership, retail, and marketing worlds as leadership coach and founder of Your Goal Digger. So we'll talk about Goal Digger here in a little while. She looks at the possibilities in people and organizations and challenges her clients to really discover their own identity and become their own authentic selves. Ashley believes that intentional leadership training and development provide opportunity to build a leadership lifestyle with one of the most important aspects we'll talk about today, self-awareness. So she challenges you to know who you are and own it. And that's one of the most important steps we can talk about when we talk about knowing your counseling center resources and finding the support that you need. And so as a Gallup certified strengths coach, Ashley uses the Clifton Strengths tool to begin the journey of self-awareness. So starting, for those of you strengths finder nerds like me out there, that's where she starts with. But then also looking at that, using her experience in leadership and development to create individualized plans for yourself as an individual or for an organization you're a part of. Ashley has her doctorate of education in interdisciplinary leadership. It's a bit of a mouthful, from Creighton University, where she researched millennials who supervise baby boomer subordinates in the workplace. She also has an MS in counseling and student personnel from Minnesota State Mankato, and a bachelor's of arts in textiles and apparel from the University of Northern Iowa. As I mentioned, Dr. Ashley is a certified Gallup strengths coach and has a certification in Myers-Briggs. So again, Myers-Briggs nerds out there, here's hers: extrovert, intuitive thinking, judging. I think we might be pretty close together, Ashley, but without any further ado, why don't we just go ahead and bring you on here? Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Glad to have you, Ashley.
Thank you.
We always start off with, in these kind of conversations, just first and foremost, we all wear a lot of hats, and I know that you do. We just talked about a few of them, but tell me about some of the hats that you wear beyond being certified. I say certified badass, just certified, certified everything. Tell me what your hats are.
Yeah. So, within the last year, I would call myself a full-blown, entrepreneur. I'm a mom. I have one daughter and she's 7. So she's a sassy first grader who thinks she knows everything, of course, right? I'm a wife, so I have an amazing husband, and I'm also an educator. So I still do go back and teach for Wartburg College and doing some things in their new master's program for leadership that they'll have starting up in May.
So you're saying I need to enroll at Wartburg. Is that the...
Absolutely.
Well, kind of turning into the topic of the conversation and sort of where your hats take you. You recently wrote about speaking for a women's conference and being surprised that you had a personal story that others might want to hear. Tell me a little bit about the story and some of the life moments you shared that day.
Yeah. So I think this is all a part of my journey, even of my own self-awareness. Was someone asked me to speak and I was like, I don't feel like I have a story to share. Like, what are you talking about? And so it took me a long time to process kind of what experiences stood out that got me to where I am and have continued to help me channel my energy towards things. One of the things I think looking back actually started in my undergrad, and I was involved in a lot of different leadership opportunities and never recognized that there were opportunities to do some of those things as a professional, right? And so we often, I think, recognize once we're graduating that, well, maybe there's something else I could have been doing that maybe was a better fit for me. So navigating that and then eventually making that decision after I discovered that life wasn't all it was cracked up to be in my original field of study, and getting laid off as like a 23-year-old from Macy's headquarters in Minneapolis. That was not how I anticipated my life going. About the same time, there was a very tragic accident with one of the sororities that I was working with. And one of the women was killed and the other one was severely injured. And that just really impacted me as far as, gosh, I need to know more and be able to do more. And it kind of challenged me to go a different direction in my career path. So then I went back to school, which had a huge impact on me. And actually, that's where I learned about the Clifton Strengths. And that was kind of an exciting moment for me to be able to do that. And I think, job opportunities after that, where I started to recognize I could have an impact in other people's lives by being able to be willing to be vulnerable and share who I was, to help them navigate who they were. And then they started to tell me that I was having that impact. So a lot of it turns out to be people and who those people are in your lives that like challenge you to recognize some of those things.
And the story sounds incredibly fascinating from multiple perspectives. I mean, you're talking about sort of all kinds of emotion being drawn up in this. Sort of how did that impact, knowing sort of what we're focusing on today? How did that impact your own sense of sort of self-awareness? You talk about sort of this transformation you went through and sort of the people that were in your life. How did that look for you?
So I think that that self-awareness piece was drawn out in many different ways. So because of my initial going back to school as an older student, right, in a master's program, it was counseling based. So we essentially had to go through our own counseling with our peers and counsel our peers in turn. And I had never experienced that before. And so I think it opened my eyes to, gosh, like this is beneficial to everyone, right? Like not just if you feel like you should talk to someone because you have a problem. It was really therapeutic to just share things and listen to other people's stories and then have that recognition that while you might not have the same experiences, you may be going through similar emotions and things and trying to navigate transitions in life that were either unanticipated or planned, but then maybe didn't go the direction you thought they were going to go, right? Like I never imagined I would go back to school. And so that was a huge life transition for me to like take that leap. And I'm not a huge risk taker, which is odd because I challenge other people to take risks, but I am very thoughtful in my risk taking, right? I kind of plan out those things. And so I think that that's just kind of something that's continued that I then learned about myself through other people and their experiences and what they would say that they saw in me. And then I'm like, oh, I should reflect on that and explore it. And so I think reflection has become a huge part of my life. And that's something I really encourage people to do as far as self-awareness goes, right? Like we often just don't take the time to do it. And one of my former colleagues used to say, like, if you don't reflect on it, did it even happen? And I'm like, gosh, you're right. Like we just kind of live these moments and go through the motions, but we don't take the time to sit back and kind of analyze ourselves or reflect on what that experience was like for us and why we reacted how we did, or maybe how we could do better or do more in the future. And so by doing that, I think that that's another way of continuing to build that self-awareness piece.
Almost kind of like the idea of at least the way I'm hearing you describe it, almost like the sort of what is the narrative we actually tell ourselves rather than necessarily.
Absolutely. Like we're living something, but what are we telling ourselves we're living? And then what are other people perceiving it as? Kind of combining all of those things into one place and really processing like what it all means and looks like.
I'm curious. I know one of the things that we sort of think about, and at least when I was kind of doing some of the background to kind of understand the work that you do and sort of the personal story you're bringing. So you talk frequently about sort of the narrative for yourselves, but just broadly storytelling. And so how does sort of storytelling figure into the work that you're doing today? And why do you focus on storytelling?
Yeah, I think that it's so important for people in general to recognize who they are and what they're capable of before they can start to engage with other people and start to really process like who other people are and how they can interact with them, right? I think that we have to know and understand who we are before we can know and understand others. And I think we often get it backwards and we feel like we're supposed to know and understand others, but it's like, well, how can you do that if you don't know enough about yourself? So I think that that storytelling is really about discovering where you are in your self-awareness process. What can you share or articulate about yourself? Because it's not just enough for you to know those things about yourself, but you have to be able to share that vision or that sense of who you are with other people if you expect them to individualize anything in working with you or helping you navigate your own personal situations.
Yeah, the thing that sticks out to me about what you said is sort of that self-awareness process. I really want to kind of dive into that a little bit. So knowing we're talking about sort of finding resilience and self-awareness today, we'll dive into the resilience side of this. Tell me about, from your perspective, what sort of that self-awareness process looks like.
I think it's different for everyone because everyone comes, especially to me, they're at a different place in their lives. So I've worked with, students, high school and college age, and I've worked with professionals who have been in their career for 30 years. And we're all at different places, no matter what our age is, right? Like there's not really anything consistent about those things. And so that's why I tend to start with the Clifton strengths, because I think that gives us that basis of, okay, this is an assessment telling you kind of who you are, but you get to go through that process and tell me who you believe you are based on what you're reading. So it's giving that common language so that people have something to attribute why, like this is how I am to. But then from there, it really goes into that individualized process of, okay, like now that you kind of have this positive piece of understanding yourself, what does that mean for you to go forward? Or what does that mean you need to continue to develop and grow about yourself? And I think one of the biggest things that's usually missing from people is just that confidence in it. And so that's where I say that self-awareness piece is important, but then you have to own that. You have to own that that is in fact who you are. And then now what are you going to do with it? Like nothing can really go anywhere without that continued action or propelling you forward in some way.
Thank you for walking through that process, by the way, because I think it's super helpful for me, but also the people listening, sort of how to walk through that and think about it. When we talk about owning it, and I think, goodness, if there's an area that we probably don't do very well as Midwesterners is probably own things. I am curious. One of the areas you talk about, and we, obviously introed this, was the fact that you assess a person's strengths.
Mm-hmm.
How do you sort of translate that or move that in with sort of this idea of owning who you are and getting people to take advantage of that, so to
Yeah.
speak?
So I think when I go through the reports with people, I don't tell them what I think it says about them. I pose questions and I challenge them to think differently. Or if they're not owning it themselves, then that's when I'm like, okay, well, tell me more about what doesn't stand out then. Who do you think you are? And it just leads into other things naturally, I think, to help get them somewhere else, right? Like wherever they need to be in that moment. But I think that having a language to put to it helps build their confidence. Like, oh, yeah, these things are a part of me. Or, yes, people have said these things about me. And so being able to have that positive approach rather than, oh, this is what I suck at, right? Like we all can pretty easily create a list of the things that we're not good at. So just being able to focus them in on the positive and then move them forward into the actions and where they feel like they want to go from there. I think it's just confidence building in that instance, because you have to practice and you can't lack confidence in everything. It has to be something specific. So getting them to own that and become, say, how can we continue to build and grow this and build that confidence piece is really important to the owning it process.
You're gonna add another process to the mix. We gotta talk at some point about this owning it process. But first, before we get too far down the line, I do want to highlight we're really fortunate to have Ashley today, and I want to kind of start to turn the corner a little bit to the business itself and kind of talk about sort of what that looks like. So, if you're gonna learn more about Goal Digger, go to yourgoaldigger.com. I keep for some reason thinking immediately to Kanye, and I'm like, I got to get my head out of this.
Everyone does, but then you remember it.
It's easy to remember. That's the best part. No, so we'll talk a little bit here. So folks on the call here or listening in, please go to yourgoaldigger.com and we'll dive into some of the elements of Ashley's business here. So why don't we just go from there? Tell me about Goal Digger.
Yeah, so I started this just based on my experiences in higher education, and I found that by teaching leadership, I was able to have, that kind of special impact on people wherever they were. And so while I might be teaching the same thing to everyone, they were all interpreting and processing things differently. And so that's when I discovered that my true passion was getting that like light bulb out of people to understand who they were, what they needed, and then how we can move forward. I'm really I kind of pride myself on the accountability piece as well. So one of my top 5 is command. So I have that realistic, kind of candid, a little more in your face maybe approach to things. And that's not for everyone. And I totally get that. But at the same time, I think people appreciate that honesty and that I'm not going to hold back when they need to be pushed or challenged towards something else. And so that's what I do. I have one-on-one meetings. I do workshops. I do group coaching, a whole combination of things. And so one of the things that I focus on is that accountability piece, the follow through for people. I'm doing some work about reflective visioning. So being able to spend time reflecting on who you are and where you're at, but then how do you move forward and what does that look like in your head? And then what are specific steps that you take to navigate that? Other things like navigating change, just any, and the hard part is that leadership encompasses so much that it's really challenging because I just want to offer everything because I want to be able to personalize it for whoever needs something. And I think that I'm able to do that just through conversations with people. So while my website lists specific kind of topics, that's not all I feel like I'm capable of doing. There's so much more to it. And so that's why I say I kind of specialize in making it specific to what the organization or the person needs.
So the specialty is mass customization is what you're saying. It can
right.
make it work for everybody. In your perfect world with Goal Digger, what do you hope Goal Digger does?
I think, my ultimate goal is just to make as many people as possible understand who they are and why that's so valuable. Because like I said, we just don't spend enough time on that. And I see so much growth in people and so much growth in their confidence levels when they're able to say, this is who I am and I am good with who I am.
I think we can all benefit from that. And I think as we go here, we'll kind of transition some of that in your mind, sort of how that might translate to mental health, especially. And I'm curious in sort of in that vein, I guess, starting down that path, what are some of the most common challenges your clients face? You talked a little bit about owning it, sort of the ownership process, the self-awareness process. What are some of those common challenges that your clients are facing?
I think just like you said, that general self-awareness piece, I think confidence is huge. That's something that even if someone doesn't come into a coaching session saying that they're here to work on, that's what we end up working on. And because it's something that you just don't really recognize until it starts to come out of your mouth and you're like, oh, yeah, there it is. I think life transitions and, we all struggle with what that looks like because we have this idea in our heads of what it should look like. And then when it doesn't, we kind of fall apart, which is okay. But then we have to be willing to help ourselves and pick ourselves back up. And so I think one of the biggest things is my focus is trying to help others help themselves. And so challenging them to say, yeah, we all need help. Here's what I can provide for you versus here's maybe what a counselor can provide for you. So again, sometimes it just feels good to have someone to talk to about where you're at in your life and what that means. And that's enough, but sometimes it's not enough and I can't be all things to everyone. And so I think just making sure that people are able to overcome or focus on the things that they need in those sessions or those instances is really important. But I think that's doesn't seem like a lot of things that people are coming for, but they're really big things that take a little bit of time to focus on.
Well, I'd imagine, just talking about identity and trying to figure out who you are, that's a big question. And I
Right.
know one of the things that I'm most curious about, sort of thinking about the challenges, thinking about these areas of ownership that people are trying to navigate. When you work with them or see this sort of, do you have, and obviously we're not going to give away names or anything to that degree, but as you're thinking of examples along the way, have you seen this sort of translate to folks seeing that, hey, I need help. I need even more help than what I can get here. Do you see that happen?
Yeah, I do. And that's typically something that if they're not recognizing it themselves, that, my big mouth in some of these situations is helpful where I'm like, listen, I think that you probably need to talk to someone else and get more, professional help by way of counseling or a different kind of coaching, or it just depends on kind of what that is. Or, in the business realm, if it's something that I'm not an expert in, then I have other resources I'm happy to connect people with. But I think sometimes when people are starting to see maybe it's not just a confidence thing, maybe there's a little more to it. There's a little more historical, things that have happened that need to be addressed before we can move forward effectively in a coaching relationship. You might need something else. And so I am always willing to have those conversations because I do not want to pretend to be this end all be all expert of everything. That's not fair to anyone.
I think that feels, for me anyway, as we're talking about, that feels extremely on brand for what you do. And I applaud you. I'm really thankful for the way that you do approach that, because I know sometimes we probably have a reasonable desire to say, how do we help regardless of where we are? But I know too, you talked a little bit about your story of sort of the transition period that you went through that took you down this path. Sort of in that experience, or even just in the time you've spent with your clients, how has that impacted your own thoughts about mental health, or sort of how this connection between sort of self-awareness and finding resilience being sort of the things that might be protective factors against suicide, or provide sort of that protective layer against potential mental health conditions and the complications with it? How has that journey sort of formalized your thoughts around that, and maybe you can share some of your insights from that?
Let me think about that. So I think just by understanding who you are, or recognizing you don't understand who you are, I think that leads to you being more resilient simply because you're willing to admit that. And so sometimes it's getting people to that point to even admit, no, I don't know who I am, or what that means, or what I'm capable of. One of the things I've learned over the years is that, and I have never, based on my Clifton strengths, none of my top 9 are in relationship building. So one of the things I've learned as a leader over time about leadership is that leadership is relational, and we have to learn to rely on others and put trust in them. And sometimes that's just hoping for the best, and other times you truly can rely on someone and put trust in them, right? So just figuring out who you can do that with. And so by doing that and building relationships and connections, that's where you're going to build that resilience, because then you have either a partnership or someone you can fall back on just to have a conversation with, or, it's more than just about you at that point. And so having the ability to make those connections is really valuable, whether it's as a professional resource or a personal resource to you. I think that's something I've just continued to learn over time. And I continue to grow and develop based on all my conversations with clients, because we're building a relationship that's different than any other relationship I have with another client, right? And so just helping people see that and understand that is important and valuable.
That's again, I mentioned on brand. That's about as on brand as I can possibly imagine. Just the idea of like, truly though, that idea of, I appreciate what you're sharing in terms of this sort of, we have to come together, and in order for us to come together, we have to know ourselves well enough to know where we are willing to be. It almost, the way you just kind of describe it, almost talking about humility in a lot of ways, to really understand sort of this, I'm willing to give ground and I'm willing to kind of come together just because I know myself well enough.
Yes, that humility, and I think that vulnerability that comes from both sides when creating a relationship is really important.
Have to give and take. That's always
it's the hard part, right? It doesn't always feel good, but it has to happen.
Well, and I'm thinking, speaking of give and take, one of my next questions for you is sort of transitional to this year. So 2020 was a hell of a year, to say the least, and I'm curious for the pandemic, how did that affect your work this year, and sort of knowing that we moved into the sort of this Zoom world, this StreamYard world, how did that impact the work that you do?
So it was interesting. I happened to go full-time only about 2 months before, like as an entrepreneur full-time, about 2 months before the pandemic hit. And I was like, oh gosh, this is the end of the world, right? Like, I'm just getting going on this. Nothing's going to happen in work. So I had to pivot, and I really had to be intentional with how I continued to put myself out there. And I had to be vulnerable, and I had to do videos, and I had to do just to put it out there. And right, like I did a lot of things that were facilitating conversations or having coaching conversations about different topics that would be helpful to whoever, was free at like noon on a Thursday, that just wanted to be on a Zoom and have some conversation with people. Being a very high preference for extroversion, I needed that too. So selfishly, some of it was for me, but being able to find ways to connect with people that maybe we weren't used to. And I think people appreciated that, that I wasn't charging, but I was just putting myself out there. So taking those risks was challenging, but it was also kind of fun because there wasn't any pressure to kind of sell the value that I had. They could just see the value through their experience. Obviously a lot of things went on Zoom, and a lot of things continue to be that way depending on people's comfort level, but just still offering, I think that's also extended my reach. As far as who I can connect with, like I'm working with a school in Minnesota, and we're doing a bunch of different coaching around reflective visioning. And, yes, perhaps they could have brought me to campus, but the likelihood of them bringing me to campus 4 different times, might not have been as high as we can now do it on Zoom. And so that's kind of fun. But I think then, I think people also had a realization during this time that they truly need to practice self-care and do some focusing on themselves. And so I think that's played to my benefit in a lot of ways. And the fact that leadership has always been and always will be an important topic or an important training that people should have, but maybe people weren't as willing to be intentional in bringing that to their organization or to themselves. And so now I've actually found that many, not all, but many organizations are more willing to kind of take that challenge on and say, yep, we need help. We need to build ourselves up, our organization, and figure out how to navigate kind of this new world that we're in.
Thinking of that, and I know I'm a very appreciative of sort of this, okay, we often think of the COVID-19 pandemic in all the ways that it's sort of decimated life as we knew it and harmed people in our lives. And I want to be sure we are always holding space for that. It's always interesting though, too, on the other hand, to talk about sort of these crazy opportunities that come out of sort of the challenge, sort of I'm not usually a huge fan of talking about don't waste a good crisis, but it seems like that's sort of where that went. But I am curious. So you found growth, you found sort of a shift, so to speak. In that too, I'm also curious, you talked about sort of the need for self-care and sort of the challenges your clients faced. What are the sort of new challenges you're seeing sort of broadly through your clients that people are experiencing right now?
Well, clearly there's that Zoom fatigue. So figuring out how to be creative so that we can still have our conversations or our trainings. But I think that because I put in that reflective piece so often, it gives people the opportunity to turn off the camera, to do what they need to do for a few minutes. And then we come back together and then, things like that. I also think that, just with all of this, I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, just thinking through sort of the challenges your clients are facing broadly through the pandemic.
Yeah. I think that, people have recognized that they really value the time that they were able to spend with their family, even though it may have made them crazy at the same time. Honestly, there were days for all of us, I think, where it was like, oh, my child needs to go back to school. I need to get out of the house. But I think that people are harnessing that and they're kind of almost missing it. Like when they've recognized, oh, I'm going back to work, or I'm not spending as much quality time and intentional activities and, things with my family, or making time to connect with friends who I haven't talked to or whatever. And so I think that through all of kind of the tragic pieces of the pandemic, people also discovered what was really important to them. So putting those values to the forefront, I think has been really important to a lot of people, and trying to hold on to what that means and looks like for them, I think is something, and I hope it continues, because I know I've done that too, where I'm like, oh man, okay, like just 6 months ago, we were in a totally different boat, right? Like where we were trying to figure out how we could leave our house. But now I'm like, oh, well, maybe I want to stay in my house and I want to, hang out with my family and do more things with them. So helping people see that those things are okay. Like there's not a right or wrong to it. It's just we're all different in what we need, and recognizing that. And like I said, owning that.
Definitely. Well, and I appreciate you sharing that, especially when it comes to sort of this, bringing it back to the idea of self-awareness and just kind of getting us out of sort of the, okay, when we're constantly embedded with our partners, our kids, our dogs, or whatever's in the house at that moment in time, that we're able to kind of go back to that self-awareness and make sure we're checking in on ourselves. And
right, there has to be a balance of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, folks that are on the line here, I do want to kind of reiterate here. So check out yourgoaldigger.com. We'll keep pushing this along the way as we go. So please check out Ash's work here, yourgoaldigger.com. Goodness, I need to slow down the pronunciation, so I'm making sure I'm getting it. But just quickly, we always like to do a few rapid fire questions. So I'll throw a few your way and then we'll kind of close things up. So first one, morning person or night owl?
Used to be a night owl, quickly have transitioned to morning person because I get up at about 4:40 to do workouts.
I'll let you do that.
It sounds obnoxious because it
is. What do you love most? What do you love to do most outside of your work?
Travel with my family. I like those adventures. Doesn't matter where it is.
I was just going to ask, where's the next location?
We're still trying to figure that out. My favorites so far, though, we've gone to Hawaii and we went to France and Spain the December before the pandemic hit. So we got some international travel in, which was awesome.
Well, when I make my Spain trip sometime in 2021, 2022, I'll give you a call.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some good stuff.
Who do you most admire?
Brene Brown. I don't know. I know so many people say it and I can't even articulate it well, but she just inspires and motivates me every time I hear her voice. I see her face. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's go.
There's something I have to say. One of our live cast or podcast inspirations is from Brene Brown. So I can always appreciate a good Brene Brown fanboy, fangirling situation.
Right.
So. What is the strangest thing you've ever eaten?
Oh, this is going to sound really odd because I don't know that it's strange to other people. I find French onion soup really strange.
I can see where that comes from. Yeah. What was strange about it from your vantage
Just
point?
like the consistency, then the flavor, and just how it looks just kind of weirds me out. Like I've eaten it, but it's not, my favorite. I
It's
don't know.
not a experience that is anything but memorable. Just
Right.
yeah. No, that makes sense.
Stand out for the wrong reasons, I guess.
Infamous, perhaps. Last rapid fire for you. So we're gathering a playlist for 2021 from our guests, just kind of having a playlist for folks to lean into. Doesn't matter what, up, down, otherwise music you're looking at. What is one song you think someone should listen to today?
I'm going to give you two because these are the two that I think through the pandemic have been my most motivating things. Chapters by Brett Young. I just love the story that it tells about kind of his own self-awareness and recognition through life. And then The Champion by Carrie Underwood, just because it's so empowering. Like every time I play it, I'm like, yeah, let's go. Kind of like when I hear Brene Brown, I'm like, woohoo, let's do this.
All right, adding two more to the playlist. We'll make sure those are chalked up. So one last question for you, then I'll let you kind of have the floor for any last thing. So you are very much in the space that you're working individually, but obviously, well, I shouldn't say you're just working individually, you're working with organizations too, but you're really kind of on the ground sort of as a change agent, getting people to own who they are and sort of own identity. Thinking of that almost in a larger sphere of sort of how that impacts systems, policies, whatever sort of larger scale community systems you're thinking of, what is one aspect that you would want to change in the world? Sort of, it could be anything related to mental health. It could be anything unrelated to mental health, but sort of through your work, what is one thing that you kind of hope to change on a large scale?
That's tough. There's so many things. I think, the biggest thing with any of the pieces that I would list probably would be just access, that people actually have access to the things they need to grow their self-awareness, to feel like they're comfortable with who they are, whatever that is, because I feel like there's so many things that feel like they're way up here that people can't get to. And maybe that's not always accurate, but I think even taking away that kind of hurdle or that perception that people don't have access to it. So whatever that looks like, I think just access to mental health counseling, to, all the things.
Speaking my language, Ashley, that's the good stuff right there. Anything else you want to share today with folks who are listening in?
No, I just think that, this is awesome being able to do podcasts like this, and just the work you all do. It was, when I was told about it, it was just so inspiring and motivating, and I love it.
No, we're glad to have you here. And I know, I don't know if I can speak for everybody who's tuning in, but I'll be sure to say, you say Brene Brown, I say Ashley Lang. So appreciate the inspiration today. Thank you for joining us. Again, for folks tuning in, last pitch here, yourgoaldigger.com. Go check out Ashley's work. I think you'll find really something probably for anybody at this point. So check it out, yourgoaldigger.com. Ashley, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Glad to have you. I had plenty of fun myself, and I know our team will be looking forward to listening to your music choices. So
awesome.
Take care.
You too.
All right. So folks, as we do every week, we tend to close out with some updates from Lost and Found. And I know we have a couple big ones that we want to be sure we get out there. You'll notice here on Facebook here shortly, we'll be unveiling a Facebook event here. And finally, after maybe a little over a year's time, we'll actually be able to host an event in person as a nonprofit. So Save the date here. Join us Saturday, May 1st from noon to 5 at Severance Brewing in downtown Sioux Falls. We'll be hanging out for the day. There's a charity tap event. We're getting $1 from every drink poured that day at Severance. There'll be a couple other games and prizes we'll be playing as well. There'll be some trivia. So if you're looking forward to some trivia the way that I am, please join us on Saturday, May 1st from noon to 5 at Severance Brewing in downtown Sioux Falls. The other thing that I'll announce or share here, of course, is we're getting into the golf business apparently. So we have a golf tournament being hosted to benefit Lost and Found through the Longley family in Sioux Falls. Their family had lost their son and brother, Ben, to suicide this past July. And in his honor, knowing the work that Lost and Found is doing to be proactive and serving young adults who may be experiencing suicide ideation or other mental health conditions, they have decided to host a golf tournament in Lost and Found's honor on Friday, July 23rd, 2021 at Grand Falls Casino and Golf Resort in Larchwood, Iowa, just across the border from Sioux Falls. If you want to learn more, or you want to register, whether to join the golf tournament or join us for dinner and a silent auction, you can go to bit.ly/longballclassic to learn more. We have plenty of spots open at the tournament yet. We have room for whole sponsors as well. We also have rooms booked. There's a block of rooms available if you plan to join, and of course, join us for dinner as well on the 23rd. If you want to learn more about Lost and Found and sort of the work that we do, I really encourage you to go to our website, resilienttoday.org, and you can kind of learn from there sort of our connections and our language where we really focus on resilience. And when we talk about resilience, what we're really talking about is this definition of resilience that comes to us from the American Psychological Association and this sort of holistic view of what it means to be well. And so I encourage you to check that out as well, apa.org/topics/resilience to learn more about the work of resilience and what it means to Lost and Found. I think I have a guest here in our home. A dog is starting to bark a little bit, so I'm going to jump off here and answer the call, so to speak. But appreciate you all joining us here this afternoon, and look forward to having you join us next week on our next episode of Voices of Resilience. Have a great day and have a resilient day. We hope to see you next week. Take care. We are compassionate.
We are inclusive.
We are responsive.
And we are here.